Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 4, Episode 19 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your, co-host Nick Cap. Joining me is me, myself, and I. Today we are rolling with the Solo Tuesday show. Going to get you your waiver wire. Going to get you your top 10 takeaways from Week 3. Very important fantasy week for football, obviously, and a big week for the NFL. It's a late night. I'm doing late on Monday. I wanted to get those two games in there first, giving you 10 takeaways. I was really struggling because I feel like we knew a lot from the first 2 weeks, and now we see the Bengals really struggling. Week 3, 0-3. Zach Taylor on one of the hottest seats in the NFL. Jaden Daniels gets his coming out party. Josh Allen and the Bills. Josh Allen now the MVP favorite after 3 great games. Man, a lot of fantasy relevancy for a doubleheader on Monday night. But we're going to get through the whole week. But first, before we get into the episode, real quick, some quick plugs. Late night, guys. If this is your first time watching, thank you so much for tuning in. Usually I'm joined by my host, Nick Giacobbe, but today we're riding solo. For this episode, guys will see him on Thursday's episodes, where we give you our all boom and all bust teams, the guys that for week 4 we think are going to have a big week and we want them in our lineups, and the guys that we are kind of fading in the week, some that we want to put on the bench, some we're tempering expectations for. That's kind of how we line up our shows. And then every single Sunday we are live 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, breaking down every single game, letting you know the big question marks for the game, what we need to learn for fantasy, and answering every single start-sit question we get. So make sure you tune in over there. Follow us on all the social media platforms. Our biggest one is YouTube. Definitely support there. Like, comment, subscribe. You know what to do. Hit that notification bell. So every single Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern, you roll over, check your phone, top notification right there. Primetime FF Pod live. Drop those start-sit questions. And let's get right into it, man. We're going to go right into the waiver wire. Very important week. A ton of injuries, as we have seen lineups decimated from week 1, week 2, and week 3. We're going to go position by position. First, we're going to start off with the quarterback. We got Andy Dalton. Phenomenal game. First quarterback of the season. 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. Great game. And you got Sam Darnold. And just so you know, we only do guys rostered in under 50% of leagues. You know, if you see your Jordan Loves out there, where your electric quarterbacks that are dropped from skepticism, yeah, you guys pick those guys up. But these guys have had 2 great games. Darnold, 3 straight great games. One of the top 5 quarterbacks in fantasy right now on the season. So if you're looking at these two, I mean, it's quite simple. I like Darnold across the course of the season. I will get into it in the takeaways. I think him and that team have been absolutely electric, and I'm ready to kind of believe in the Vikings for now. Not sure if we get a Super Bowl run, but for fantasy, I mean, all the guys that you really need have been great. Justin Jefferson has delivered. No Hawkinson there yet, but Aaron Jones has been really solid for fantasy. Sam Darnold been a top 5 quarterback. Jalen Naylor, one of the younger receivers over there, looks really good with Addison injured. So, I'm kind of starting to believe in the Vikings now, and I like that opportunity. If I was going to go for the 1 week, if that's all you need for an injury, if Jordan Love for some reason misses one more game, I'm happy to roll out Andy Dalton. Revenge game against the Bengals. We just watched Jaden Daniels absolutely torch him. Short week for the Bengals as well. I mean, they are in absolute do or die mode. So I'm not saying he's going to cook them, but from what we saw last week and what we've seen with this Bengals defense, that is such a great opportunity for him to get that revenge with these Carolina Panthers. And then you talk about Deontay Johnson, a guy that's seen that defense as well for many, many games. That Andy Dalton-Deontay connection is going to be very pivotal in this matchup. So I really like that opportunity for Dalton. Am I spending all the fab in the world on him? Absolutely not, because I do think he's a waiver wire guy. He's a guy you play week to week. But listen, man, after that big game and with this opportunity, you got to be in on him. Next, kicking it over to the running back position. Bucky Irving, still only rostered in 32% of leagues. He is definitely, to me, one of the better running backs that you pick up on the waivers. And I got 3 more here that I'm sure people are going to talk about, and then we'll get more into Bucky Irving. Manuel Wilson, owned in 2% of leagues, had the big week for the Green Bay Packers. I don't mind having a roster spot for him because the depth chart there is really screwed up. It's Josh Jacobs and a bunch of injured guys, so don't mind the roster spot for Wilson later on. And then 2 guys that I'm really high on for the waivers. Roschon Johnson, only owned in 1% of leagues. DeAndre Swift has been probably the worst starting running back in football in terms of efficiency, in terms of the bad offensive line play, and they are going to need some crazy changes for Caleb and that offense to get rolling. So I have no problem rostering Roschon Johnson, not ready to start him yet, but I think he's going to have to play a bigger role in this offense, and it's going to come. The other one I really like, Kendre Miller, started the season on the IR with injury. Maybe after 4 weeks, we get to see him return to action, week 5, hopefully. But Alvin Kamara has been great for fantasy. He's an older running back. Jamal Williams has not looked great. Kendre Miller has an opportunity not to overtake Alvin Kamara, but Kamara misses a couple games with injury. Being an older veteran back, has the opportunity there. And if the Saints wind up going on this crazy playoff run based off the first 2 games, not as much on the Eagles game, but based off the first 2, Kendre could definitely find some time on this team, get some reps, especially in that replacement situation. But let's get back to Bucky Irving. My co-host, Nick G, huge Bucky Irving guy, and I'm starting to see what he's seeing. Quick stat here. I wanted to pull this when I saw it on Twitter. The most yards per carry among 34 running backs. There's 34 running backs with 25 plus carries this season. Bucky Irving is the second most efficient among all of them, averaging 6.2 yards per carry. The second worst of that group is Rachaad White, his starting running back. So Bucky Irving's been outrunning Rachaad White and this offense. Rachaad White, clearly the PPR upside back. If Bucky Irving works into that role, he has league-winning potential. So when we say go get Bucky Irving, like, go ahead and do it. I don't think he's going to be on the segment for long because he's going to break that 50% cliff. Is it this week? Is it next week? It's going to happen. He's worth the roster spot, guys. Don't let him sit there on your waiver wire. Go grab him. Next, wide receiver position. Juwan Jennings, huge game. I believe he was the wide receiver 1 on the week with the 3 touchdowns. You'd have to imagine it. It's possible Jamar Chase eclipsed him tonight, but I don't think so. So Juwan Jennings, probably the wide receiver 1 on the week. Owned in 36% of leagues, was picked up heavily this past week, but sat on a lot of benches with the skepticism around him. Quentin Johnston, 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. Definitely worth considering the roster spot at this point. Jalen Tolbert, a guy I said last Thursday I really liked, got a huge benefit from the game script. I believe he finished with about 12 fantasy points, but was on the field for a ton of that game. Jalen Naylor, talked about him a little bit earlier, Vikings wide receiver, young guy, has delivered for multiple fantasy games in a row. And then Allen Lazard, one of your top wide receivers on the season, definitely worth considering the roster spot, 30%. If I'm ranking these guys, Juwan Jennings has the most short-term upside for sure. I will say, for those that are very impressed and willing to fab dump, that I am not willing to do. He had one huge game last year for fantasy. It was a game against the Rams where Deebo Samuel was hurt. So it was the same exact situation, copy-paste, and he delivered. So it's definitely a possibility. If I am going to lean on this list, I still believe in Jalen Tolbert as having a ton of upside. So much time on that field, so much of a dedicated snap share there. He's building a rapport with Dak Prescott. We saw it on the last drive of the game. Hopefully that momentum carries over and he keeps getting that workload. I do like Naylor as well in deeper leagues. I do like Allen Lazard. He's been fantasy relevant now. 2 of the last 3 weeks, and that Jets offense rolled on PrimeTime. So a little bit of the bias there, I might say. But I do think he's worth the roster spot. I don't know if he'll be great over the course of the season. I think he's better for like your best ball leagues, a DFS hot start. But I think at this point, from what we've seen, you definitely have to consider a roster spot for him. Tight end position. Cole Kmet had a big week, 26% rostered. Tyler Conklin, Jets tight end, 27% rostered off a big week. And Brock Wright, backup tight end for the Detroit Lions. If I am willing to take the risk on a tight end, it's got to be him based off what we've seen from Laporta last year and this big opportunity with the injury. I would definitely take the shot there. I think Cole Kmet Tyler Conklin. We see tight ends rotate in and out every single week who gets the big week, and it happened for Likely in week 1. I forget who it was in week 2. This past week, it was Dallas Goedert. So listen, man, it just rotates, and you got to hope you got the right guy at the right time. So Brock Wright definitely has the highest week-to-week upside of any of these guys. So that's the guy I'm considering. And real quick, we'll give you some defenses. You can pick who you want to play. I had this before the Monday Night Football game, but I'll say it anyway. Bengals versus Panthers. If you do not believe in Andy Dalton and you think that they got to go balls to the wall, it is Bengals season over Andy Dalton, former teammate. The Indianapolis Colts versus the Steelers. I think you could get away with either of these defenses. Definitely prefer the Steelers in this one, but the Steelers offense is not scoring touchdowns. They are not turning the ball over. So the Colts are pretty much a safe play. They're not going to lose you the week. They're not going to win you the week. Probably not forcing a ton of turnovers. So I really do like this opportunity for the Colts defense to at least be a safe fantasy play. I don't know if they're going to win you a week, but a lot of the top defenses have the bad defenses this week. You got like your Jets are going up against the Broncos and things like that, so you're not going to get a ton of them. The other option that I do like if Tua is out, Tennessee Titans, I think that they have been much better than their record suggests, especially on defense. So those are the guys I really like. I think a lot of them are on your waiver wires and do present some opportunity for you. Let's get into it. Top 10 takeaways. Usually it's 5 from me, 5 from Nick. But listen, we're not going to cut you short on the content. Nick's out on the West Coast enjoying his little vacation. He'll be back. We'll get that workload from both of us. But you know what? Sometimes you need a bell cow back, and that's what I'm going to be this week. I'm going to give you your 10 takeaways. Let's start it off. Number 1, going back all the way. You got to think a little bit back. Thursday night football, New York Jets football. And listen, there's a lot more fantasy-friendly options on this team than we had considered. Only 2 guys on the Jets were really being drafted inside the top 12 rounds of fantasy football. Breece Hall, obviously, and Garrett Wilson both going in the top 10 picks on Sleeper, at least. Right now, Breece, RB5 on the season. And I will say I did pull these numbers before the Monday night game. Not all the platforms are updated to include, so you might see a James Cook jump over him or something like that. So just bear with me. But at the time, Breece Hall, RB5, Braylon Allen, RB25, Aaron Rodgers, QB12, Alan Lazard, wide receiver 14, Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 26, Tyler Conklin, tight end 12, and the defense is top 10 as well. So a lot of fantasy-friendly options on this team. A lot of guys on your waivers. Braylon Allen, another guy I think is definitely worth a roster spot. I think he's gotten picked up in a ton of leagues based off his 2-touchdown game a couple weeks ago. So not sure you're going to be able to get him anymore. But I'm just saying there's a lot of fantasy friendly on that offense, and we got to see some of it against New England in Thursday Night Football. I'm sure we'll see a little bit of it against the Broncos. But speaking of the Broncos, going into takeaway number 2, and it's something I've stressed on the Thursday shows, the All Boom team, but more importantly, the All Bust team. Patrick Surtain is probably the best shadow corner in football. I think he is the number 1. I'm still gonna lean on my guy Sauce, but listen, Surtain has been shutting down top receivers. Through 3 weeks, DK Metcalf, he played against him week 1. He had 5.9 fantasy points in that game. In the other 2 games, he's averaging 24 fantasy points or over 24 fantasy points. George Pickens, week 2, 4.9 points. In the other 2 weeks, George Pickens averaging over 12 fantasy points. And Mike Evans, a guy that for 9, maybe 10th season in the league, been so dominant for fantasy, 3.7 points, averaging 15 plus in the other 2 weeks. So he's been shutting down receivers, and we got to give you some notable matchups if you are concerned. And I definitely am. We'll go a little deeper real quick. Some notable expected shadows across the course of the season. Garrett Wilson next week. We got Devontae Adams in there, Chris Olave, Zay Flowers, Rashee Rice, which I think is going to be a huge test of my guy versus an elite corner in this league, and then Drake London. A little bit later down the season, playoffs, and I'm going to say this now. I know a lot of you are not thinking that far ahead. You got to get to the playoffs. I do not blame you. Trade these guys away because these guys can absolutely lose you a playoff game when they're putting up these low numbers. I mentioned these first 3 guys. I'm going to do some quick maths here. They're averaging less than 5 points per game. And DK Metcalf, Mike Evans, George Pickens, all drafted within the top 4 rounds of fantasy football. Maybe the 5th round for George Pickens, but really all in the top 4 rounds. Evans 2nd, 3rd, DK 3rd, solid 3rd, and then Pickens 4, 5, depending on the league. Here's the 3 guys that you need to consider for your playoffs. First round, he gets Michael Pittman. Has not been great for fantasy. Probably not going to be able to trade him too high based off his first 3 weeks, but go and get somebody at that similar level, or go package him with a running back and go get somebody better. Quentin Johnston, mentioned him on the waiver wire segment, 3 touchdowns, 2 weeks. Justin Herbert a little bit dinged up, so maybe not as appealing this week, but wait for another big game from Johnson and make that move. And the most important one, Jamar Chase. Listen, Pat Surtain is clamping receivers. I gave you three very talented receivers. Jamar Chase, very similar builds to Mike Evans, a little bit not as bulky as a DK Metcalf, but big, deep downfield threat receiver, vertical guy. It'll more likely be a T. Higgins show in that matchup than Jamar Chase matchup. So I have no problem moving Jamar Chase if I'm you, and I'm trying to get a lot of value. He just came off this huge week. Go cash in on it. Go get your Amon-Ra's. Go get your Tyreek Hills, your CD Lambs. Like, go try and make that move, because I would hate for you to be 3-0 at this point and lose your fantasy championship because your top guy that carries you there lets you down. And this is really speaking to the 3-0s that feel really confident in their team. Next up, we're going to talk about the Vikings offense. We talked about him earlier with Sam Darnold. This is starting to feel real. I mean, they have got to feel really good about this hot start. And, you know, there's some teams that started off hot, the Buccaneers, the Texans, the Chargers, the Saints. They all came down to earth, and the Vikings are still riding this high. And I think they're going to ride it for a little bit longer than we think. The last couple of years, there's always kind of been one of those shocking teams. I'll give you a few. 2020, the Steelers, these are teams that all started off at least 8-1, by the way. The 2020 Steelers, they never felt like a great team. They were kind of winning games on the fringe, and you're kind of just like, all right, but like, this isn't a real team. The Vikings feel totally different than that. The one I think that they remind me of the most is the 2021 Cardinals. Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray. That offense was absolutely electric. The defense looked pretty good in spots, but was not great. They lost some team chemistry kind of in the middle of the year. Their QB play kind of declined right around Call of Duty time. I don't know if anybody remembers that too well, but that's kind of where we saw the decline for the Cardinals. Not saying that Sam Darnold's a big gamer. I know he's a big art guy, but I don't know. I think that this is kind of the most reminding, where I look at the personnel on defense and I don't see the names. I don't see the playmakers of like a Chris Jones or like the 49ers or the Eagles have had, and Aaron Donald for the Rams. Like, those are the teams that go to and compete in Super Bowls. That's kind of who they remind me of. Some other two that go down the right path. 2 years ago, the Vikings with Kirk Cousins, they looked unstoppable all year. Last couple of weeks kind of fell down a little bit. I think they missed the bye, then lost to the Giants in the first round of the playoffs. Then you have the 22 Eagles, who went all the way to the Super Bowl, shocking everybody. So I think they're like the 21 Cardinals, maybe the 22 Vikings, where they're going to have that big start to the season. They look really good and just don't deliver in playoffs. But for your fantasy football teams, that's great. That's what you want. I was a big doubter of Justin Jefferson. He is proving me wrong every single week so far with Sam Darnold. So I think he's going to continue to do that. I will take my, I'll swallow my pill there. All right. Number 4 biggest takeaway. This, and I'm going to give my anonymous raw GM some credit for this one, because it's a take I was thinking of, but when he said it out loud, I was like, this is making it onto the show. This is why you do not draft your quarterback early. Granted, Allen worked the pick based off what you saw this week. Not so much the prior 2 weeks. It was not the QB1. But here's what we got. Here's the top 5 quarterbacks you drafted in fantasy. Josh Allen, who finished top 3 this week. Again, did not fully update. I assume it was the one, but top 3 for sure. You have Jalen Hurts, who is currently sitting at the QB6 on the year. Patrick Mahomes sitting at the QB10. Lamar Jackson sitting at the QB1, and CJ Stroud sitting at the QB13. Those are the 5 guys you drafted. But at the time of this recording, here's your current top 5. Lamar Jackson, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, and then some of those late round guys, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott. Now, Joe Burrow might have worked his way in there based off his performance. Jaden Daniels might be on the fringe. Josh Allen almost definitely did. Trevor Lawrence almost definitely did not. But listen, if you didn't get your Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, you missed that quarterback as to this far of the season. Like even Jalen Hurts, you took him in the third round. You could have taken Kyler Murray rounds later. You could have taken Dak Prescott. Clearly, you were not drafting Darnold. You were not trusting Baker as much as you could have. But listen, for those type of guys, your Daks, your Jordan Loves, your Brock Purdy's that go in that 8 to 10 round, this is exactly why you should not always take your quarterback early. And clearly, we're not talking, that one guy in the league that takes Mahomes in the first round. We're talking to you, and we're really talking to me, a guy that loves taking quarterback in the middle of the third, one of those top guys. So got to swallow a little bit of pride there, but I will say this. If you draft one of those superstars, if you get that top quarterback, you're almost safe to make the playoffs. You're just not safe to win a title because that's not how teams are built. Number 5. I mean, we talked about it last week that we said you had to be patient on the rookie receivers. Well, guess what? They held the fort down, those top 3 that went in the top 10. Marvin Harrison Jr., 17.4 points in week 3 following his week 1 performance. Marvin Harrison in week 2 said, Malik Neighbors, hold my beer. And Malik Neighbors in week 3 said, take it right back. Wide receiver 1 on the week. Jamar Chase might have jumped him. We're going to have to double check on that. But he's the wide receiver 1 in fantasy at the moment. Juwan Jennings definitely had the wide receiver 1 on the week numbers. But Malik Neighbors is the wide receiver 1 in all of fantasy football at the moment. And then Rome Odunze. He finally broke out. We saw it with Caleb Williams. We'll get into Caleb shortly. 23.4 points. And Nick and I have said this for years on this podcast. It's the Justin Jefferson effect. Justin Jefferson, through 2 weeks of the season of his rookie year, looked horrible. I mean, he was on the field. He was doing cardio. He was running routes. He was not getting targets. And it was like, time to drop this guy. Think about your Ladd McConkeys, your Brian Thomases. Those are guys you might be not thinking about dropping, but definitely not trusting in your starting lineup. Well, Rome Odunze finally had it. Week 3 panned out. He was dropped in 30% of fantasy leagues in the first 2 weeks. And listen, if he's on your waiver wire, I mean, first off, go grab him. That is the number 1 priority. But he ran 99% of the snaps ran on this team. I think I believe it was only 1 missed snap. He ran the most routes on the team, more than DJ Moore. So Odunze stepping into a very big role on this team. We expected it to happen. We didn't know if Keenan Allen and DJ Moore were really going to own the field. Keenan obviously dealing with some injuries, but Odunze's Caleb's guy. Caleb's really trusting him now. We saw it here in week 3. We like that, and we love fantasy for our superstars, especially if you're in a dynasty, a keeper format. He's got extra value there, of course, especially with how late he was drafted compared to your Malik Neighbors and your Marvin Harrison Jr.'s. Number 6. Caleb Williams is actually starting to look a lot better, but man, this dude is like desperate for help at this point. He looked horrible in week 1 and week 2. Week 3, no, he didn't look great. The stats were a little bit padded. He got a Hail Mary in the second half that was complete to the 1 yard line and some garbage time yards. But this is the best I think I've seen Caleb look in an NFL game, and not just statistically, but in the air. And listen, this team does not have enough talent. And I know we said it in the offseason. A lot of people were all in on the Bears being in the playoffs. There's some people that thought they were going to make the Super Bowl. That's a little bit, a lot of it over the top for them. And here's some stats. And this is why I said I did not think Caleb Williams would do well to start the year, might pan out better at the end. They had 49 plays in the first half, and they walked away with 0 points. That is a coaching problem. That is a Matt Eberflus problem. They need to figure out a way to get an offensive coach in there. Clearly, the kid Kubiak will be a big option from the Saints this next coaching cycle next year. If you're looking for one of the veteran coaches that's still looking for a job, maybe you roll the dice on older Pete Carroll. I don't like that. Mike Vrabel will keep the defense elite. But is a big trenches guy, so you might see some improved offensive line play, which they could definitely use. Maybe you go that Ben Johnson route. If Cliff Kingsbury keeps it up like he did with Jaden Daniels this week, maybe he gets another shot at head coach. So there's going to be some options later on in the season. You can definitely count on that. So we'll see what that looks like. But just some other things that were really atrocious for this team and why he really needs more help. DeAndre Swift, I mentioned it earlier. He's one of the worst running backs in football at the moment. The Bears had 63 total rushing yards against the Colts. You want to hear a crazy stat? First 2 weeks of the season, the Colts were averaging 237 rushing yards per game in those first 2 games. To the running backs, to the quarterbacks, to the backup running backs, like all those guys put together were torching this team, and the Bears could only put up 63 yards. And this offensive line, it's mostly due to that. They are brutal. I encourage everybody. I imagine you're on a smartphone watching this. Go on Twitter, go on TikTok, go on whatever platform you want, YouTube, whatever. Give a quick search to Bears 4th and 1 against the Colts. 4 offensive linemen literally hit the floor. And the Colts defense, who cannot stop the running game, was just standing, walking right past them on 4th and 1 as the Bears are running a pitch to the outside. Can I tell you how many teams would run a pitch to the outside on 4th and 1 instead of a tush push or a QB sneak or hand it to your running back? Not a lot. Not a lot in this league. So there's just clearly big issues on this team. And thank God Adunze popped because they really needed it. But man, I will give Caleb this. He put up the big fantasy day. 2 touchdowns, 360-something yards. The 2 interceptions, a little bit of a bummer, but with 360 yards, who cares? So good for Caleb. Hopefully he can keep that up and his fantasy numbers can go up because Jane Daniels is going to lap him for this Rookie of the Year based off that performance. And Malik Neighbors has definitely entered that conversation. Number 7. I didn't want to come out and say this, but I think Mark Andrews, it's the panic button at this point. The numbers clearly, if you just look at the stats, are glaringly awful. 8 targets in 3 games. But if you look at the advanced metrics, it gets even worse for him. And especially this last week against the Dallas Cowboys. He only ran 6 routes in the game. Yeah, I know. Doesn't feel right for a tight end that, by the way, Mark Andrews in his NFL career has, when he's lined up next to the offensive line, has only blocked, I believe it's 5 times in his entire NFL career. 5 individual plays. So he is not the blocking tight end. He is all coming out of the slot. He's going up next to the offensive line and running routes. And usually that's kind of a big tell for defenses because if Mark Andrews is on the field, you typically know they're passing. If Mark Andrews is not on the field, he's usually the team's usually running. Big indicator, by the way, for those DCs out there. But there were 2 tight ends that outsnapped him in this game. It was Isaiah Likely, who clearly looked great in week 1, not as great in week 2. And I forget this guy's first name, but the last name is Kolar. He's a very big blocking tight end. And when this team is running the ball, and that's kind of where they're going back to that Greg Roman roots, Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, they're going to keep running the ball. And last year, Baltimore ran a ton of 11 personnel, which is a 1 running back, 1 tight end set. That's where Mark Andrews dominated. But this team is switching totally, reverting to 12 personnel, 22 personnel, where you have the 2 tight ends and the 2 running backs, or 1 running back, 2 tight ends. But those sets, Isaiah Likely is really feeding into these touches. So the team is telling you they think Isaiah Likely at this point is the higher upside, more talented tight end in the team. So if I am the Mark Andrews owner, I don't know if you can afford to cut him because of the draft capital and the name value and the upside that's there. But it's kind of time to put him on the bench. When you see 6 routes ran from any tight end, and this is now 3 weeks of 8 total targets, 6 routes ran in 1 game in a very high over-under game, not a game where it should have been a low-scoring game. Like, it does not get much worse than that at the position. It's hard to say, but listen, I know all the tight ends have struggled. It's worth considering putting him on the bench at this point. And I don't know if I'd cut him. I would not be trading for him. I don't think he's a buy low candidate. I think he is a low candidate, period. I don't know how he bounces back unless there's a big injury or big offensive change to this team, which I don't think is going to happen after they drop 28 points on the road in Dallas. But this is really, really bad for your fantasy team. Really, really bad. Next up, the Lions running backs, man. And we know that this team was electric and elite, but these running backs are fantastic. And the Lions are just also so happen to be the best team against the running back position. We saw James Conner, who was averaging like 19 fantasy points per game, put up 3.5. So Lions are great against running backs, and their running backs are great. And I think this is the new culture of the team. They were the hunter last year. They were trying to run up the score 35, and that's how they wanted to win. That's what the Chiefs were a couple years ago. 6-7 years ago when they were up against Tom Brady. I think Patrick Mahomes' second year in the league, like this early on. I'm not saying that this is Patrick Mahomes by any means, but the team needed to learn to win the game on the ground, win the game with defense, and that's what the Lions are going to try and do this year. Monty Gibbs, 39 rushing attempts, 40 total fantasy points between the two. Spectacular game. And what does this mean for fantasy? Yes, your Amon-Ra had a great game. Laporte is now injured in week to week, but all I'm saying is Amon-Ra, Jameson Williams, and Sam Laporta cannot all three be great at fantasy when you give 40 carries to your running backs. And it's why I had so much skepticism with all the Lions players at the top, because we knew there was going to have to be one outlier. It's clearly been Laporta to this point of the year. But Gibbs has not been great for fantasy. Monty's very close to him in points per game. Jameson Williams has been much better than Amon-Ra outside of this past week for fantasy. So listen, you're going to need a lot of things to recover to make up for the ADP there. And they're all going to have safe floors from this team being so talented and that offensive line being electric. But I think this is a run-first team. And David Montgomery, one of those steals of the draft at this point, he's been so efficient on the ground. He's been the touchdown guy for 3 straight weeks. They are not backing down on that. And Dan Campbell's just going to run it down your throat and bite some kneecaps. Like that's his motto. That's his mantra for this year. Good for them. That's what you need to do. And that's what they're doing. They're doing it great. Now got 2 last takeaways. I'm going to tell you a team that I do not want to buy low on, and I'm going to tell you a team that I do want to buy low on. That's how we're going to wrap it up. 9th takeaway, I'm not buying low on the Miami Dolphins. Tua is going to be back sooner than we expect. He traveled with the team this past week in the longest flight of the week from Miami, Florida, very far south, to Seattle, very far northwest, about a 6.5, 7-hour flight, somewhere in that range. It sounds like he's going to return at some point soon. I'm not buying into the Dolphins hype. This is what they were before the Tua injury, and this is what they were this past week. They were a ETN fumble away and the Tyreek Hill 80-yard touchdown from being 0-3, panicking, hit like every alarm would be blaring for this team if they didn't have that one win. And granted, they got the win. Good for them. Can't take that away from them. But Tua struggles in big games. They're going to be playing from behind a lot this year. And the weather's getting colder. The big part of the fantasy year, if you remember, Tyreek was on pace for 2,000 yards. Before it got cold, I know he got a little dinged up, but before the weather got bad and the games got bigger, that's when the Dolphins fell off. And the games are only getting bigger from here when you're really playing catch up for the division with Buffalo at 3-0, the Jets at 2-1, and with an easy schedule. So not great. And the back half of the schedule, we talked about the cold weather games. It is not good at all. The last 4 games of your fantasy football season, when do or die to get into the playoffs, they got the New York Jets. 3 playoff games: Houston Texans, San Francisco 49ers, and the Cleveland Browns. That's 4 of the 10 best defenses in football. If you want to tell me the Jets aren't that great or the 49ers aren't that great, one of these 4, and probably multiple of these 4, are going to shut down fantasy options. It's statistics, right? If you have 4 top 10 defenses, one of them 1 week or 2 of them multiple weeks are going to shut down these guys. Whether it's Waddle, whether it's Achane, whether it's Tyreek Hill, someone's getting locked down. And I don't want to be the guy that's forced to play my Jalen Waddle, who I would happily trade away at this point. In a matchup like this, where you took him so high, like, I would rather get the news that Tua is reportedly back and trade these guys away. I was concerned about the schedule before the season. I'm not wavering on that. But in the games that we did see, They did not look great against the Jags. They did not look great against Buffalo, and clearly they got destroyed by Seattle. So we have not seen anything good from them, and kind of is what it is. The schedule is really the big concern. If they were facing the Patriots twice in the playoffs, totally different story, right? The one favorable thing, they go to the Texans. Yeah, it's down south. It's a little bit warmer. Do I want to see them in Cleveland and New York? No, you don't want to see that. Real quick, now, last takeaway from the week. A team that I think are sneaky buy lows, and it is not. I am not saying they are better than the Dolphins. I am not saying they are an elite team. But what I am saying is the value is super low right now because the team does not look good. But the advanced numbers are telling you that these guys are going to bounce back for fantasy in a big way. I think the Jaguars are sneaky buy lows. I wanted to get one of those Monday night games in there. So here you go. We're going to talk about the one team that does not get highlighted and will not be highlighted on your fantasy shows. Your Bills went off. Your Bengals went off. All your Commanders went crazy. Your Jags didn't. But I liked some things that I did see out there. I know the game didn't look great for Trevor. I don't think he looks like he's not playing like a franchise quarterback since Thanksgiving last year. Has not won a game since Thanksgiving last year out on the field. But here's why I like the Jaguars. Trevor is an above average NFL quarterback. He has played 3 very tough defenses. The Dolphins have looked pretty good in week 1. Maybe not great. He went up against the Browns, who, again, I mentioned earlier, top 10 defense in the league. I know they didn't look fantastic against the New York Giants, but they have that's more so been a Deshaun issue. And the third game against Buffalo, we watched Buffalo shut down Miami last week before Tua got hurt. So they've had a tough schedule. Their schedule gets significantly easier. They get the Titans, they get the Colts, they get the Texans, who just let up a ton of points to the Minnesota Vikings. And I do think the Texans have a better defense than the other two in the division, but the schedule is really light for them. And if they continue to struggle, listen, they're going to keep passing the ball. We've watched Gabe Davis run the most cardio of any player. I mean, this dude is in on practically every snap, and I think he's only been targeted like 6 or 7 times this year. And that number should hopefully pick up at some point this year. But even not him, Christian Kirk looked pretty good in this game. We're not seeing him on a lot of he's the team slot receiver. I still think Brian Thomas Jr. is the clear target on this team and the guy that I really want in my leagues, getting a ton of targets now as a rookie, looking to build that connection with Lawrence with the schedule lining up. I think there's real big opportunity for these guys here. And it's kind of a good recipe. You got talent. I think it is a more talented receiver room than we give it credit for. Travis Etienne has not been efficient. He got a big play in this last night game. If you look at the numbers, you might say, oh, he's averaging this many yards per carry. No, I like to look at median. How many times are you going over and under a number? It's about like 3 yards. He is not very good. And the schedule lightens up. So a lot of things check a lot of boxes for the Jags to be better. And more importantly, they've been in all these primetime games where everybody's watching them struggle, right? They were in a prime spot on Red Zone in week 1. The Browns game, no one really saw, but you just had this big game where they got obliterated. We watched 3 other teams. They are going to be on the short end of the stick. They are going to have no desire. Whoever is rostering them, whoever is owning them is doubting all those fantasy pieces. You want a piece of that action. All right, guys. There you go. 10 takeaways, waiver wire. Thursday, next episode, me and Nick will be back. All boom, all bust. We will see you guys then. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, notification bell. You know what to do. Social medias all at the bottom over here. Appreciate you guys. And